Okay, guys, so today we are going to be learning about the Russian Revolution, and this is a reminder that you are to be filling out your graphic organizer as you are listening to the lecture today. So, you're focusing on part one of the graphic organizer, and that is all the causes of the revolution and like what went into that. And so, just part one right now with the little spice things. So, looking into the background, we have to start with the fact that Russia was a monarchy it had been for 300 years, and Tsar Nicholas II was the king or the Czar of Russia during that time. And in the early 1900s, you guys know, as we spent a long time talking about it, World War I was going on, and Russia was doing horribly, just not good at all. They were very unprepared, militarily unprepared, and technologically unprepared. When I talk about militarily unprepared, they had no good military leaders. Like, they had no strong generals or anything like that. It came to the point where Tsar Nicholas actually had to leave Russia and go to the front lines and be like the military leader for his army. He had no idea what he was doing. He had no training. He was ill prepared for that job as well too. So from the start, Russia, just leadership-wise, is not ready to go for World War I. And then in the second part of that is they couldn't even produce enough supplies for their soldiers to equip them properly, to train them properly, anything like that. They were training with broomsticks. They were sending men out to war, some of them without guns. They say, hey, when the guy in front of you dies, pick up his gun and you can start fighting with that. So just kind of a mess of things. They were ill prepared for World War I militarily and technologically, just not able to produce enough for their people. And so what that results in, and if you look over here, this is Tsar Nicholas II, and there is Tsar Nicholas talking to soldiers. But what this results in, and what does it mean, is that means from 1914 to 1917, there were 2 million Russians that died in World War I. And looking at the overall death tolls of World War I, Russia had the most people die, and they didn't even fight the entire war. They had more people die than the Germans, which is just crazy to think. They also had 4 to 6 million people captured or wounded in World War I as well too. And from a civilian standpoint, that's just awful. Like, people are just dying, men are dying. And the will to fight in this war anymore is just completely gone. Like, the public is completely against it. They want to get out of the war. They were not happy with the leadership, and they were constantly criticizing the Tsar. So any move that the Tsar made was very criticized, just for the fact that World War I was not going well. Made a lot of people agitated, and Russia was spending a whole bunch of money on World War I, and there's problems at home. Famine, starvation, people are just unhappy, like they're running out of bread. Things are not going good in Russia as a whole. Within World War I on the foreign fronts, and then also just at home, poverty, famine, starvation, because they're spending all that money to just completely fail in World War I as it is. So, not very happy with the Russian leadership. Now, you remember, Russia is a monarchy. It's an autocratic type government, meaning that there's just one ruler who rules everything. That's Tsar Nicholas here. And this is the Romanov dynasty. So this is the same dynasty that's been in place since Ivan the Terrible. Yeah, remember Ivan? Like, way long ago. They're all descendants of that dynasty. And this is the Romanov family here. You guys may have seen the movie Anastasia. Yes, Tsar Nicholas' daughter was Anastasia. So, there's a reference there. But the Tsar relied a lot on bureaucracy to hold up his government, and the army as well too. So you guys know what the army is, but what does bureaucracy mean? Bureaucracy means like the inner workings of government, meaning like the different departments doing their jobs. Because he didn't do everything. He did delegate a lot of things, and so he counted on those people doing those jobs and doing them well and supporting him, and the army supporting him. And when he left to go fight in World War I, he left his wife in charge of a whole bunch of different things. And during that time, him and his wife, Alexandria, which is this one here, become increasingly distant from one another. And it's just, they're not getting along very well. So there's just some tension within the marriage as well too. And actually, while he is gone, she falls under the influence of a self-proclaimed holy man. So he's out. She's fallen under this influence of this crazy guy. Who is this crazy guy? That is Rasputin, Grigory Rasputin. What you need to know about Rasputin is he was an uneducated Siberian peasant. He came from the very lower class, and he believed at a young age that he was this holy man who could solve problems. He went around preaching and like saying he had these powers. He was able to depict these prophecies and do these curses and stuff like that. But he had healing powers, I should say healing. But he had healing powers, and something that was going on with the royal family, I'm going to go back a slide here, is the son, you see the little boy here, the son here, Alexei, had hemophilia. And hemophilia is when your blood is not able to clot. And that's really bad if you get hurt and your blood won't be able to clot. And so they bring in this holy man because, he's supposed to be able to fix all these things. And the holy man gives them this advice and says, don't listen to the doctors, don't take the medicine that they're giving you, and it works. Reality is the doctors were giving him a form of ibuprofen, and that made the bleeding actually worse. So now we know that today because ibuprofen does not help with hemophilia. And so when he told the family to stop listening to the doctors and the boy started to suddenly get much better, they were like, oh my gosh, Rasputin, you know everything. And so Alexandria started to go to him for every decision. He seemed like a very smart man. And he becomes very powerful and influential within the Russian government because the wife is consulting him on all the decisions that she has to make. Here is Rasputin here, very kind of creepy, interesting looking man. But he was known as a ladies' man. Very piercing eyes, you can see here, and especially here, this is with the royal family. Very kind of piercing, I guess is the word we're going to use here. But he's known as a ladies' man. So there was like political favors going on. Russia's government kind of becomes a jumbled mess. Like even the people in the government aren't liking the Czar because of this guy. And remember, he relies off the fact that everyone else does their job, and they don't like what the Czar is doing because Rasputin has a lot of influence in the government. So Russia starts failing economically. They're not able to produce. People are very poor. They're not able to buy things for their families. People are starting to starve. They're actually going to have a grain shortage as well too, so they don't have enough bread. And people really start to question the monarchy. So with Rasputin and the failures of World War I, people just do not like what's going on in Russia, and they're blaming that on the king or the Czar. Now, I'm not going to play this video. I'm just going to kind of explain it real quick. But essentially, what ends up happening is, but if you want to go look at this video, it's a TED Talk about Rasputin. So you can go look at that later if you'd like. But basically, the inner workings of the government, they get sick of Rasputin, and there's going to be a murder plot to kill Rasputin. And this story is super crazy because they tried multiple ways to kill him. First, they poisoned these pastries and fed him these pastries, and then he didn't die. Then they poisoned the wine that he was drinking, and he didn't die. And then the guy gets all crazy, pulls out a gun, shoots Rasputin at point blank, still does not die. He starts going after the guy who shot him. They shoot him a couple times, once through the head as well too, to the point where they were able to tie Rasputin up and throw him into the river. And that is the death of Rasputin. After that, he finally did die, but when they found his body, his hands that had been tied were actually not tied anymore. So which has people questioning, like, was he really dead when he was thrown into the river? We will never know, but it's pretty crazy. So, I like this quote here. It says, there would be no Lenin without Rasputin. What you need to know is Vladimir Lenin is going to be the leader of the Communist Party, who's eventually going to take over the Russian government. In order for this guy to take over the government, there had to have been someone like Rasputin to cause all these troubles within government and really make people distrust the government. Another interesting thing is that when Rasputin did have all this like influence and stuff like that, he put a curse on the family and said, if I am ever killed, you guys will be killed as well too and be placed out of power. And so what's really eerie is his curse comes true. Okay, and so when Rasputin dies, then everything kind of starts going downhill for the Romanovs as well. So check out that TED Talk video if you would like to. So those are all of our causes leading into like what actually happened during the revolution. So if you want, you can take a break at this point, but I'm going to keep lecturing. You can pause this video if you want to. You should have part 1 filled out. Maybe you have a couple left that you could throw Vladimir Lenin in there, the Bolshevik Party, things like that. But majority of part 1 should be filled out at this point. Here's a couple funny videos about Rasputin. There's a song if you guys want to check those out as well too. So I will be posting this PowerPoint later on. So the revolution itself, you now are looking at part 2 of the graphic organizer, and I'm going to go through these event by event. So you guys should already know event number 1 is the March Revolution. You should put March Revolution down, and now you're going to find a one-sentence summary to summarize the March Revolution. So let's look at what was the March Revolution to get us started off. So essentially, as I talked about, like, things are crazy within Russia. People are not happy. And there's a strike that breaks out amongst the working class women in Petrograd, which is known as St. Petersburg. And so people start protesting, and a few weeks earlier, they actually started to limit the amount of bread a family could have, rationing the bread. And so women started protesting and started being really angry, and they started going on strike, and the men joined as well, too. And this is like one of the second largest city in Russia, and all these people aren't working, and pretty soon the factories have to shut down, and the Tsarina, Alexandria, the queen, is like, what the heck is going on? Like, these people wouldn't even be out here if it was cold. Like, this isn't serious. So she writes her husband and tells him they're a bunch of hooligans, but asks what she should do. And he says, well, go ahead and bring the military out and shoot whoever is not abiding by the rules. And so you can see the aftermath. This is the protest in this big picture here. In the aftermath is all these people being shot. Things like that. So that is the March Revolution, event number 1, that, you know, when the government starts shooting its own people, people are going to start to get really angry. So our second event then leads to Tsar Nicholas's abdication. Hey, and let's talk about what that means. And we're going to say, remind me tomorrow on this. All right, but the legislative body, known as the Duma, actually met and established a provisional government, and that government decided, we don't need the Tsar anymore. Like, people aren't supporting him. He's making horrible decisions. We need to kick him out. And so at this point, Tsar Nicholas did not have support of his government, which, you know, we talked about that bureaucracy, and he did not have support of his army. And now that he did not have the support of those two factions, he then decides to step down or abdicate the throne, fancy word for stepping down, and relieving himself of the position of Tsar within Russia. And so that ends the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty, started by Ivan the Terrible. And when that happens, his family, Tsar Nicholas and the whole Romanov family, are placed under arrest. And it's kind of like a house arrest. So that's our second event. Third event is, okay, well, there is going to be a group that takes over. So what is this group that's taking over? And that would be the rise of the Bolsheviks. Okay, well, that's a real fancy Russian word there, but the new government decided to carry on with the war, which was a huge mistake. Remember, all the people hated World War I because of how much money they were spending on it and how many people were dying. So that was a major mistake for them to continue with World War I. So they started to face a lot of challenges from these people called the Soviets. Now, Soviet is a Russian word for council, meaning like these different kind of groups, kind of like political groups of people within Russia. The largest Soviet or largest kind of political group is the Bolsheviks. And so Bolsheviks are speaking out against the provisional government, and you guys know provisional governments are not very strong. Hey, they tend to be weak and very fragile, and this Bolshevik Soviet is speaking out against them because they kept in World War I. So we had the rise of the Bolshevik Party. Now, a little bit about the Bolshevik Party. What are they? The Bolsheviks are Russian social democrats who believe in Marxism, okay, or the Marxist Party. And if you don't remember what the Marxist Party is or what is Marxism, it's the Communist Manifesto written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. We talked about that last semester. So they believe in the concept of that book, and what that book says is there has to be a violent revolution, right here in the bold, of the working class. Okay, the leader of the Bolshevik Party in Moscow is Vladimir Lenin. And you know, a lot of guys always talk about Stalin and communism and things like that. Stalin did not get Russia to be communist. It was Vladimir Lenin. And so this is the major leader of the Bolshevik Party, and he believed the only way to rid Russia of capitalism was by doing it by a violent revolution. And where has he been all this time? He spent a lot of time abroad. He was making speeches, stuff like that, trying to gain more followers. And when the Tsar stepped down, he's like, oh, hey, perfect time to come in and try to dissemble the provisional government. And so the German military leaders actually captured Vladimir Lenin, and they put him on a train back to Russia because he was being a problem within Germany, speaking about all these socialist, communist ideas. And so Lenin comes back and is thinking, okay, it's time to try to seize power within Russia. And what did these Bolshevik people promise? Number one, the most important thing was an end to World War I. Okay, number two, they're going to redistribute all the land to the peasants. Okay, so everyone is equal, everyone's fair. Remember, socialism, communism, everyone does what everyone needs to do for the best of everyone else. They're going to transfer the factory ownership from the capitalists to the workers, and they're also going to transfer the government power from the provisional government to the Soviets, which the Soviets represent the working class. So all of this, the big four main ideas of the Bolshevik Party is transferring power from the rich people to the working class people. Okay, all the workers, stuff like that, are going to have more power and be equal to the owners and stuff like that. Some of their slogans: peace, land, and bread, workers control production, and all power to the Soviets. So what you should know, biggest thing, end World War I. Okay, next biggest thing is give power back to the working class people. And by October of 1917, they had the majority in Moscow and Petrograd. Remember, Petrograd is St. Petersburg. And their membership had grown from 50,000 to 240,000. And so now the Bolsheviks were in a position to claim power. So Vladimir Lenin, along with this guy here, who is in charge of Petrograd, the Bolshevik Party in Petrograd, which is Leon Trotsky. He'll be the military mastermind of everything. Lenin's kind of like the political mastermind. He is the military mastermind. So together they're going to work and try to claim power over Russia. So that brings us to event number 4, the October Revolution, which actually happens in, it's like October-November Revolution. So let's talk about that. Hey, when they did this, it was November 6, 1917, and the Bolsheviks basically go and overthrow the Winter Palace. The Winter Palace was like the Palace of Versailles in France, so like really prestigious palace where the government was held. There was really little bloodshed. Honestly, the government crumbled pretty easily. They did come in with weapons. It was technically a violent revolution, but it didn't take much to actually overthrow the government. So publicly, Lenin turned all the power over to the provisional government of the Soviets. Remember, he's giving the power back to the Soviets, which represents all the working class. But honestly, the real power passed through a Council of People's Commissioners, and Vladimir Lenin was in charge of that. So although it seems like the workers have the power, technically this is going to be a government headed up by Vladimir Lenin. So number 5, the creation of the Communist Party. So the Bolsheviks, once they take over that government, the Soviets are in control, technically, though we know Vladimir Lenin's in control. They renamed themselves the Communists. Okay? And although like everything seems fine and dandy right now, they're nowhere near to being done because not everyone in Russia wants to be a communist. So this is going to lead to some problems later on. And there is Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels alongside Vladimir Lenin. These two wrote the Communist Manifesto. So, side note, what happened to the Romanovs? The Romanovs will be executed. The parents were killed and the children were able to escape right away because they had jewels sewn into their clothing. So when the the communists tried to shoot the Romanovs, it bounced off those jewels and didn't actually kill them immediately. But eventually the children will be captured and killed. That's where the story of Anastasia kind of comes into play, is the fact that people believe that, oh, maybe she did escape and stuff like that. There's all those myths and stories and whatnot, but they have confirmed that all the Romanovs did die when the communists took over. The 6th event is the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and if you remember, the first thing that the communists promised is that they were going to get out of World War I, and that is what this treaty is. But in order to get out of World War I, it wasn't like, hey, we out, we're done with World War I. They had to give up a bunch of territory. And so you can see they had to give up like Finland, the Baltic states, that's right here. They also had to give up parts of Poland, the Ukraine, and some territory over here. At this time, it was given to the Germans and the Austrians in the Ottoman Empire because that's who they had to sign the treaty with. Eventually, we know Treaty of Versailles, that's all going to be given back to the Allied powers. So they did get out of World War I, which is what Vladimir Lenin promised he was going to do. Now, as I said, not everyone is happy. And when not everyone's happy in the country and you start to have a division, you're eventually going to end up with civil conflict, which leads us to a civil war. The Russian Civil War was between the White Army and the Red Army. You can guess it. The Red Army is the communists. We know red represents communism. And the they had the advantage. Although they had to fight on many fronts and like these little skirmishes popped up kind of all different places within Russia, they were more unified. They had reinstated the draft. They were very well trained and disciplined, and very organized. And that was all because of Leon Trotsky. I mean, it was so rigid, like the discipline and everything. If you did something wrong or you fell out of line or whatnot, you could be killed or shot on spot. So the soldiers were fearful of doing things wrong. But that leader that created this like mighty army is Leon Trotsky. On the other hand, they're fighting the White Army. The White Army is the liberals, the anti-socialists, and actually some United States soldiers came over and fought too because, oh goodness, democracy is being threatened. And so they were extremely concerned about the communists taking over. They sent thousands of troops to different parts of Russia. But the problem was the White Army wasn't unified. There wasn't one leader in charge of all of the White Army. They had all these different little sections and factions and things like that. So they're not unified and they did not have one common goal, which is going to lead us to the communists winning the Civil War. Although it did take a few years for that to happen, how were they able to achieve it? First of all, they initiated what is known as the War of Communism campaign. So they took control of the banks, they took control of the industries, they took control of the grain, and they took control of the government, and they made sure they had the advantage in all areas. They were taking grain for the soldiers, they were making weapons for themselves, and then also they used whatever money they wanted to from the banks to help supply them. On top of that, people in Russia were starting to become fearful for their lives like normal everyday citizens because they created what is known as the Red Secret Police. This is a lot like the Reign of Terror during the French Revolution, and then also like the secret police Ivan the Terrible put in place as well too. If you spoke out against the government, you were going to be killed. And that's what that Red Secret Police's job was to go find these people. You can see a couple pictures of the Russian Civil War there, but officially the war ends in October of 1922 with the Red Army as the victors. There was 7 to 12 million Russians that died, which is huge if you think about it, and most of those people were civilians. But in the end, we know the communists win, and that leads us to our eighth and final event, the creation of the Soviet Union, in which he transforms Russia into a centralized state under the control of the Communist Party, and that happens in December of 1922. They officially deemed themselves the USSR, or the Union of Socialist Soviet Republic, also known as the Soviet Union, and the countries and territories that officially make up the Soviet Union ruled by communism is Russia, Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, Belarus, and Azerbaijan. So that makes up the Soviet Union. There you can see the Soviet Union symbol, and now until 1991, Russia will be a communist state. So hopefully you're able to fill out the rest of your graphic organizer. Have a great day, guys.